Natural Law, Class 7.
Last time we closed talking about the fact that we observe laws in Mother Nature, that if we disregard those laws, if we eat too much, we get indigestion, we don't feel well. If we overeat before we're supposed to study, we're not going to be able to study. Nature exacts its own comeuppance. It exacts, if we remember what he said here, Mother Nature becomes a ruthless exactor of justice when she's violated. So, what we're doing now is we're going to deal with two more subsections. I just want to take a look at something here. Two more subsections that will bridge us into the particulars of looking at the natural law teaching regarding euthanasia, birth control, abortion, all these things. But he's establishing the fact that these laws exist. The law in man of self-preservation, the law in man to reproduce, the law in man to seek knowledge. He doesn't call them laws. He calls them the basic inclinations. But we, in a certain sense, we can call them laws, because as we're going to see a little on, he talks about law as being something that gives us direction for the future, gives us direction for our actions. So, anyway, under a section called the law and constancy. The law and constancy. Very simple. He's just talking about the fact that it is constant. Because he says that, well, why is it that with the particulars of natural law, the picture of human behavior even, there can be so many variables. And of course we know that that is due, man, even without, if I would say to a pagan audience, instead of saying God, I would say nature. And I would say nature put obvious limits on our intelligence, but nature put no limits on our stupidity. Everyone would laugh, and everybody would agree with it. Because man is prone to folly. Man is prone to do the wrong thing, to misunderstand things, to not get the full picture, to have this deficiency of knowledge and deficiency of operation. We all know we have the will to do the right thing, but the fact is we are often drawn to the wrong things. And in general, even a pagan audience would agree with that. But what happens then is, because we have all these variables, people will then take that to the wrong conclusion, and they'll say, well, that means there is no moral law, or that means that law will change over time. Because there is this perceived confusion, so that means the law is really arbitrary and not constant. Ignoring the fact that what is constant that we saw, that's why we keep going back to these things, self-preservation, reproduction, and also the desire for knowledge. And he got into a little more particulars earlier about self-preservation, the duty to tell the truth, the fact that it's just practical, that you can't really live in society with people who are not telling the truth. And also he got into the fact that everywhere we see man, he is bowing down and worshiping and acknowledging something greater than he is. Okay, so that's what he says, though, about the fact that they once you leave these primary areas and you go into the secondary, then man starts to become confused, and he says, such failures leads some men to a denial that such an entity as natural law exists. And many will claim that all morality is relative, constantly shifting, situational, a commodity that varies with time, place, and circumstance. And he's going to answer that based on what we've studied with three basic points. First, oh gosh, I'm using the permanent marker.
That would explain why it worked on the board.
Yeah, hold on.
Here. Ooh, it's a little bit lighter. A little bit lighter.
Oh my goodness. What a dope. Isn't it funny though? This happened when I'm talking about things that are permanent.
Hey, it's lighter than it was before.
We need a new board anyway.
Yeah, but anyway, may I try?
You could just
Try it
finish
one
off
more
the
time.
word. I will squirt and you wipe.
Well, that was
It's not going to come up.
okay.
Okay, so I guess this is the forcing action for a new board, eh?
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Well, we're coming to the end of the year anyway, so. All right. Well, there we are.
Well, can you finish it up so that it's, the design is a little bit goofy if it's going to be permanent?
Yeah, we'll do that in art class.
Okay. I'm going to turn the M into a mountain because that's what it looks like. It looks like the mountain from How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Oh. That's it.
Okay, actually,
like Christmas love.
yeah. So the fact that okay, the 3 points actually come later. I had the wrong page here. But the fact is that it is constant. That man's human nature doesn't change. What was true for man 3,000 years ago, and what was true is the same that's true for man 1,000 years ago is it's true for man now, based on these things that we've studied about the inclinations. From these facts, we must conclude that the natural laws regarded as general precepts is the same for all men at all times, in the same way that those basic inclinations are the same for all men at all times, which is actually part of natural law in a way. So natural law itself and the moral law is the same when we're talking about natural law, as opposed to, or as in contrast to positive law. All right. The general precepts of natural law are the same for men at all times. And we also talked about the fact that I covered. He's if I'm not mistaken, he seems to talk about this twice, but maybe he's just trying to drive it home more. But the fact that if we start to give into secondary things, such as our appetites, and ignore the primary, then it's going to affect our thinking. It's going to cloud our thinking, and it's going to make us, if we get into the habit of simply gorging and satisfying our appetites, then the intellect and the will are weakened and kind of sink below this constant drive to satisfy our appetites. And the reason men want to satisfy their appetites is because, why? It's because it's instant gratification. I don't have to think about studying, say, philosophy for 4 years before I really grasp what's going on, and I know that this work is going to reward me in the future, so I keep at it now, even though when I get up from my study bench, I feel as if I really haven't made any progress. Okay, the intellect knows that. But the appetite says an entire bucket
Of KFC.
of Kentucky Fried Chicken, here and now, yum yum, give me some, and gorge it down, and then especially KC, not only the overeating but the grease. Nature exacts its revenge. But the point is you get the instant gratification. So that's why it is understandable that people go after follow the sense appetites, because the sense appetites are rewarded immediately. The problem is the intellect has to guide the sense appetites, because the sense appetites could actually end up following the sense appetites will diminish our understanding, diminish the operation of our intellect. And so, anyway, and that's why people reject natural law too, because he says here, for such a man, the demands of the natural law will be an obstacle to his thirst for sensual pleasure. So, really standing back objectively and examining natural law, there are many who don't want to do it because they can see where it's going to take them. They know it's going to get into in the way of these habits of appetite that they formed that they're happy with, and that they're kind of it's a vice. Okay, it's a habit done over and over again. It's a vice. So anyway, the main thing then is the next section where he talks about law and man. Law and man. And he comes to everything we've said. I don't really have to explain this too much at this point. Law and man. We come to three then basic conclusions that's going to be the springboard for moving into the next section. The first is that, I'd rather use, this is starting with the fact that the law is constant, okay? First, the natural law is written on man's heart. Starting with the basic principle that man should do good and avoid evil, and then the particulars that flow from that, as we talked about before, that I don't need to repeat again. Second, that this law is known to all men. Even if it's known in a confused and imperfect way. It's known to all men. I've told the story, and you know it, of the Sioux Indian chief, who after Father DeSmit preached to him for the first time, the Sioux Indian chief begged the black robe to come back, and he said, "We are wicked, we have bad hearts. We need someone to guide them." Okay, that is this operation of the natural law working in this well-intentioned and good Indian, because he knows that there is a law written on his heart, and he knows that he and his fellow tribemen has transgressed it. So the first, it is written there. The second, it is known. Second, that it is known. And third, that the natural law helps man to perform good actions. In the supernatural realm, we see the man coming to our Lord and saying, "What must I do in order to gain eternal life? What must I do? I have to perform actions." Well, and of course they had our Lord there to tell them specifically, but man himself is looking, what must I do to perform good actions? And the natural law is that direction that's given to us. It's given to us for the future. Once we know what the law is, then we know how we act. If we step in this direction, we know we're going in accordance with natural law. If we step in the opposite direction, we know we're going against natural law. And this also has, although I don't know how much time we'll have to, we didn't do conscience, did we? Did we do conscience?
We might have touched on it.
I think we touched on it. But the fact that conscience, the role of conscience, most people, well, I don't know that it's most people, but too many people have this idea of conscience being something that simply bothers me after I've done something wrong, or something that makes me proud of myself when I've done something virtuous. Not proud in a bad way, but just the recognition that we did something good and it makes us happy, and we rest in that happiness, and it's a feeling of accomplishment. Okay, that type of pride in oneself, which is a good thing. But the main thing is that conscience is not so much the operation of something that reflecting on something that happened already, but conscience is proscriptive and directive, that it directs our actions. It is that knowledge that we have of good and evil, and it will direct us how we act. And so, after the Second Vatican Council, there was an awful lot of talk about conscience and the duty to follow one's conscience. And yes, that is true, but again, they've substituted the primary with the secondary. Yes, we have a duty to follow our conscience, but the first duty is to form a correct conscience, to know what the truth is, to know what the law is, to know for a Catholic what the Catholic faith teaches, and the morals that rests on these truths, and then act accordingly. And strictly speaking, conscience is the last act of the intellect and will before we act. And the way Monsignor Smith would describe the work of conscience is, once we know what the truth is, once we know what the law is, once we know what good and bad is, then we are confronted with something, and our judgment, our intellect, our will says, this is good here and now, should be done by me now. This is wrong here and now, should be avoided by me now. That's the role of conscience. It's the last judgment that we make before we act. And that conscience has to be properly formed. And this is one of the reasons, of course, why we study natural law. So that these principles on which we operate regarding good and evil are not simply just, now, in a certain sense, it's good enough to say, well, God said it, and that's it. But even God gives us reasons for things. And also God allows us to discover, through this type of study, that what he proposes as his law is actually in conformity with our own nature. And as I said before, when we follow the law of God, we're conforming with our nature, and it's good for us. It's good for us overall. And, St. Paul talks about that a little bit when he talks about the law of man written in man's hearts. But, so anyway, next section we get into, the final section before we get into the particulars, is what he says, the law and its definition. Now we're going to go back to one of the first classes we had when we talked. I didn't dig up the quote from St. Thomas Aquinas. Maybe I'll bring it in for the next class. But when Aquinas talks about that, it's man's participation in the divine law. Because if the law is written on man's hearts, then who did the writing? There had to be a supreme being who did the writing. If man has these inclinations to self-preservation, and it applies to all men, and this inclination to self-reproduction, and this inclination that he wants to know, and we are unique in this, we want to know for the sake of knowing. A cat might be curious, but that's just sensory activities working themselves out. A cat sees something twiddling. That's why the cat toys are these little mice that you wave in front of the cat. He looks at them and he's mesmerized by them, and then he attacks them.
And then you squeak it and throw it.
You squeak it and okay. Well, try doing that with your pet rabbit, or try doing that even with a dog. A dog will chase a ball, but that little mouse on the string, that the dog will just look at it, or just maybe just start chewing it. And but no, all men have this desire to know. Okay, and the fact that all men have it means it was put there by a supreme being. And so that is why we say that the natural law, yes, it comes from nature, but you really can't cut natural law off from something higher, which is the participation in the divine law. And that, I think, is why one of the reasons the enemy knows this, and that's why that Clarence Thomas, that just as the Supreme Court, everyone was having a fit on the neo-pagan side, the Kennedys and the liberal Democrats and everything, because if he's an expert on natural law, it has to bring you to God. You just can't if there is this natural law, then where did it come from? They know the answer. They don't like it, so they rebel against it. And so they didn't want to give him a hearing. Well, they gave him a hearing, but they ran him through the shredder. So anyway, he says, now I'm trying to find, yeah. Oh, a point that he wants to make, an important point, is, and he's made this point earlier, but he wants to reiterate it again, that the human will is not involved in discovering the natural law. This is not the product of our will. It's the product of our intellect. Remember what we said in the last class? It requires, to really study natural law, it requires the ability for sheer objectivity and detachment. Detachment is a rare virtue.
Very few people find it attractive.
And very few people find it attractive. But it requires, and that's why people like Aristotle and people like Aquinas were masters of philosophy, because they had the ability to detach, just kind of step back and look at things exactly as they are, without their will getting in the way to cloud their judgment. They certainly had very good and well-developed wills, but they knew to study things as they are, it required detachment, objectivity, and looking at things to see the way things really be, as Woodbury would say. So the will is not involved so much in this study. The will comes in after we learn what we're supposed to do and then put it into practice. But he basically says then, the natural law, and this is just a kind of a rewording of what Aquinas said, the natural law in man is nothing other than a participation in a far greater law, which is, as it were, in God. Okay, you can write that down. This is from Father Raymond Smith. The natural law in man natural law in man is nothing other than a participation in a far greater law
Okay.
which is, comma, as it were, comma, in God, period. And the reason he words it differently from Aquinas, because if you read this book, you see that he is actually aiming this to people who really don't know what the natural law is and who want to learn about it and may not even be Catholic. He is, as we saw through this whole thing, he's taking you, examining nature, examining the way things are, what we observe in man, what we observe in the world around us, and bringing you to the conclusion. So that's why when he comes to this conclusion, he doesn't quote Aquinas. He's able to give Aquinas' definition without quoting Aquinas, because in a certain sense we've come to the same conclusion anyway. Okay. Now, he also goes on to say, and we're coming actually to the last points here. He actually goes on. He also goes on to say that, you can write this down too, man's sharing in this eternal law is what Actually, go back. Scratch that. Okay, because he's going back then very quickly to something that we would have studied earlier in ethics, the eternal law, which is the complete and perfect rule within God himself. So he says, now you can start writing, quote, this complete and perfect rule within God we call the eternal law. to be 3 sentences. Next. By this law, God governs and provides for all things on a natural plane. Say it again. You need it.
Yes.
By this law, God governs and provides for all things on a natural plane. Period. And final.
Not there yet. You'll be scared.
Final sentence. Man's sharing in this eternal law is what men have come to call the natural law. Period. Now, do you remember Dr. Waters telling about the difference between philosophy and theology?
I don't remember exactly what
I
he
think
said,
you remember.
but theology starts from the acknowledgement that there is a God, and they're starting from a religious point of view.
Yeah, but he had one very simple way of saying it. Theology is a bird's eye view of reality, and philosophy is a worm's eye view. The bird's eye view means that when we get divine revelation, we are getting it from God, who's telling us it's coming, as it were, from the top down. And we're getting it from the point of view of God. And once we learn the point of view of God, we're on very certain ground. Philosophy is the worm looking upwards and saying, where did all this come from? Why am I here? How did I get here? Do I have any point in my existence? Do I have any laws that I have to live by? And you're working it out through the study of nature, from the ground, and that's why he emphasizes the worm's eye view. So we can see then with these two definitions, first he gave us the worm's eye view definition, and then he gave us the bird's eye view definition. The worm's eye view definition: the natural law in man is nothing other than participation in a greater law, which is, as it were, in God. So he understands these things about himself, and he sees it's part of, these are laws operating within him. Where did this law came from? It came from a greater being. Okay, so he's looking up. It's the worm's eye view. And then Father Smith immediately reverts to the bird's eye view. The complete and perfect rule of God we call eternal law. Here we are up here. But this law governs and provides for all things on the natural plane. So God is providing, again, bird's eye view. And man shares in this eternal law. Man sharing is what has been, in this eternal law, is what is called the natural law. So when you see that one sentence definition of Aquinas in the future, you'll see the background that it comes from. And now he's going to do something which I kind of anticipated, which is he's going to take a quick look at the Ten Commandments. The fact that the Ten Commandments, and he doesn't even go through them one by one, because as you know, the first three deal with God, our duties to God. 5 to 10 deal with our duties to our fellow man. And then Commandment 4, honor thy mother and thy father, is kind of that bridge between God and man. Okay, honoring, because when we honor our father and mother, of course the subsection, all that, is the fact that we also honor the authorities that God gave us. So he points out the fact, okay, that the first three commandments are centered on acknowledgement and honor of the Supreme Being. And again, this is something we see played out in what you would call the natural law, the natural activity of even primitive tribes. I know we're not supposed to say primitive anymore, but primitive tribes, that they are bowing down and worshiping something. They're doing it in a confused way. There's no way they're going to know that the day designated by God for worship is Sunday unless God tells them. So they can't be held responsible for having their ritual on the night of the full moon, or however they, or the first buds of spring, or however. A lot of the times these pagan religions are very wrapped up with the cycles of nature. Okay, and they do it according to that. God told us keep holy the Sabbath day, and that's how we know about Sunday. So they can't be held responsible for that. But they are bowing down and worshiping something, and this is something we see in man everywhere. You see in man everywhere. In fact, the more atheist-style explorers, I think there was a tribe that they found deep in New Guinea or New Zealand or Australia. It was in Dr. Waters' part of the world. And he said that they emerged, the modern explorers emerged from this tribe and said, we have found a tribe that doesn't worship any supreme being. So your contention is not true. But Dr. Waters said upon examination, they found that this particular tribe considered their relationship and their rituals for the supreme being so sacred, so mysterious, and of such high value that they didn't talk about it with anyone. They didn't perform their rituals with any outsider around. That was found out later. So, we see in nature man worshiping something, and that corresponds, of course, to the first three commandments. Next, in all societies, we do see the honor that is expected of children and young people to their parents. And sometimes it transforms also to the tribe. I don't know the details of all these primitive places. So you can see, of course, the little people of the Kalahari, very strong families. Very strong families. The little boy crying when his dad is going to go leave to throw the cooked butter off the edge of the earth. And also the duty to the family, because who is the first one who greets the little bushman when he comes back is his own little boy. Comes running towards him. Okay, this is just instilled in nature. So that corresponds to the fourth commandments. And then everything else we see: thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. All these things, living according to these principles of fidelity to your loved ones, fidelity in marriage, speaking the truth, and not stealing from a lot. Oftentimes, too, because we say the people trying to work it out for themselves will have a confused notion of these things. Sometimes, I guess, in some of the Indian tribes, it was considered wrong to steal from a fellow tribesman or a family man, but not wrong to steal from a neighboring tribe or a warring tribe, things like that. So it gets to be confused. But for the basic elements of any society, you have to live according to the Ten Commandments. In fact, I think C.S. Lewis, I didn't read it, but Dr. Waters talked about it. The C.S. Lewis actually did a study of the various pagan religions and showed how much that they correspond to their life and their moral law and their religious laws, how much they correspond to the Ten Commandments. So really, that's it for this class. And we are going to now move into those sections of natural law where men do get confused. Everybody knows we must seek the good and avoid that which is evil. Most people know that we have the duty to preserve our life. Most people recognize that all men have this thirst for knowledge. And men recognize that we have to speak the truth. Those are the most general. But man will get confused in the particulars, particularly at a time when we have a media or a public relations campaign that wants to change men's thinking. Dr. Waters explained part of the common good is a well-informed public opinion. And we haven't had that in a while. We really do not have it now. And so men will be confused about things like euthanasia. because it's not sold to us as an evil. We're going to kill grandmom. It's sold to us as a good. We're going to relieve grandmom of her suffering. She's suffering, she's painful, she's in pain. The best thing that we can do is to give her what they call a friendly helper, a little extra dose of morphine, to take her out of her misery. Okay, it's these things that we're going to talk about that are contrary to the natural law are always sold to us as some sort of positive good. So even with these things, people are still seeking the good and avoiding evil, but they're doing it in a perverse way. So that's what we're going to go through in detail. The 6 points being mercy killing, divorce, abortion, birth control. I always seem to forget one.
Divorce?
Did I say divorce? I think I said divorce. And racial segregation. I'm missing one, but we'll get to it. So anyway, that's all for today.
Sound production, Oltyn Library Services, all rights reserved. This recording may not be reproduced without explicit permission of Oltyn Library Services, www.oltyn.org.